In studio, we're joined by security expert, Mr. Avi Melamed. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Well, I do want us to begin down south since, according to American officials, the main activity on behalf of Israeli forces in the coming days, in the coming weeks perhaps, will be less from the air and more from the ground, with the main focus on what is dubbed the shaft war, those underground tunnels.
Yes, I think that's the upcoming phase. I mean, once Israel has been going deeply into the ground, now circulating around the Gaza Strip, now Israel has a better ability to extract more and more intelligence, and that intelligence can be translated into operational moves on the ground in a short period of time, where actually the need for an aerial intervention, sort of speaking, is relatively less, and then we are looking more and more at the ground operations that are taking place in order to address the challenge of the tunnels.
Now, earlier in the day, American officials confirmed the attempts of Hamas to smuggle out from the Gaza Strip into Egypt its own operatives, terrorists, using surprise, surprise, civilian humanitarian infrastructures via ambulances. And while it is, without a doubt, outrageous, practically speaking, does it impact much the operations on the ground?
No, not necessarily. Look, the basic assumption is that, remember, there is tunnels between Gaza Strip and Sinai as well. So it's very likely that some of these people already out there through those tunnels. We don't know exactly who and how many and so on, but we have to take into consideration there will be a constant effort by different commanders of the Hamas maybe to try and to leave Gaza Strip through those tunnels. This is one of the methods that they are using.
So no surprise there either. And let's jump to the northern front, because we are less than a day after what was perhaps much anticipated first speech by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Let's take a quick listen and unpack it further. Yeah, all right. We'll hear Nasrallah later, but bottom line, or the gist of his statements, using a very fiery rhetoric, not just towards Israel, but towards vis-a-vis the United States as well, but distancing his organization and Iran, for that matter, from Hamas's activity, and to an extent, Mr. Melamed, if we're trying to read in between the lines there, making it quite clear that he will not sacrifice Hezbollah for the sake of Hamas's survivability.
Yes, Eli, you know, when I'm sifting through the whole rhetoric and determinations and whatever Nasrallah was making, here is the bottom line. He basically says to Hamas, you are on your own in this. And there was something very interesting that we have to notice when he was making this speech. There is a script on the screen when Nasrallah is speaking, there is a script, and the script is citing a verse from the Quran, and it's citing a verse from a chapter in the Quran that is called the chapter of Al-Tawbah. Tawbah is a word in Arabic which means repentance, remorse. And the verse that he is actually citing says, "May Allah make you the victorious." In other words, what he is saying to Hamas is,
best wishes.
Best wishes, good luck. You made your own, not only your own unilateral move, he says to Hamas, you made a mistake. And he basically said, you didn't inform us. You know, I've been sitting here in these studios from the beginning of the war, and I was talking about the dilemma of Iran and the Hezbollah vis-a-vis this whole war. And a couple of days ago, when Nasrallah was meeting the leader of the Islamic Jihad, Ziad Nakhaleh, and Salah al-Arouri, one of the leaders of Hamas, they came to the room, and I was basically saying that back then. They came to the room anticipating that that Nasrallah will say, guys, I'm full steam ahead with you.
We're in it together.
We're in it together. And I said in that interview back then, I said, like, I think that Nasrallah basically was pouring some cold water on their heads. Yesterday, when Nasrallah was making his speech, Hamas leader had no illusions. They knew exactly that Nasrallah is out. They knew it before. They were basically expressing it before, hinting for that before. And actually what Nasrallah says yesterday to Hamas was, you made a mistake. You didn't consult me. now you have to bear the repercussions.
And this is particularly interesting, Mr. Melamed, because only last week we've heard perhaps we got a teaser to that in the form of a Khalid Mashal interview, Hamas leader, of course, voicing some more than mild criticism on the lack of hands-on involvement on behalf of Hezbollah. And in return, and this is what was perhaps most interesting, that politicians and pundits related or associated with Hezbollah were telling him, Mr. Mashal, mind your own business.
Yeah. One of the things that came out very clearly, and by the way, not only from Hezbollah, here is something very interesting. Leaders of Iraqi Shiite militias that are also backed by the Iranians, and they are part of this axis.
Those who attacked American targets in Syria.
Yes. Basically, they also expressed that sentiment. In between the lines, they actually said, don't you dare criticizing us, because you, Khalid Mashal, you, Hamas, you took yourself the freedom to act unilaterally. You basically presented us with a fait accompli, and now we are expecting us to play according to your pipe. It's not going to happen.
But do you attribute that, Mr. Melamed, to the Shia-Sunni divide, or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily. The big thing here is, in the end of the day, Iran is the one that makes the call.
Right.
And when I was talking about the Iranian and the Hezbollah dilemma, the Iranian dilemma was, are we going to try to save Hamas whatever the cost, meaning we should send here Hezbollah to the fight, jeopardizing not only the downfall of Hamas, but also a very severe damage to the Hezbollah, or are we going to basically come to terms with the downfall of Hamas? It seems to me that for yesterday, based upon Nasrallah's speech and signs before, that the Iranian regime basically made an inner decision, and the decision is, we are not going to sacrifice Hezbollah to save Hamas.
And obviously, not less interesting what's happening in the domestic Lebanese scene. Prime Minister Najib Mikati meeting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Amman today. And it is no secret that the Lebanese would not like to see Hezbollah getting involved with the war here in Israel. But before we unpack what it means strategically speaking, let's head to the ground to see what is happening there. Back here in studio with Mr. Avi Melamed, the founder of Inside the Middle East Institute. Mr. Melamed, as we speak, the American Secretary of State is in Amman. He was here yesterday. Once again, American media described his arrival in Amman, where he's meeting, already met the Lebanese Prime Minister, but perhaps not less important, foreign ministers of the Arab regional players here. American media dubbed his arrival there empty-handed. What should be our expectations from this, especially as there's talk about an agreement over fuel entering the Strip, and we do know that fuel fuels terror. Yeah, I think that this is perhaps the best way to put it.
Well, Ali, we have to remember, parallel to this whole scene of the war that's going on, we have all this, the story of the day post the war, meaning what's going to be the arrangements in Gaza Strip. And right now, in the Arab world, there are all kind of like semi-discussion, semi-baked ideas about what's going to be the next day. In that context, I would set a very significant date. In about 10 days from now, Saudi Arabia is going to host an Arab summit. And towards that summit, and probably during that summit, one of the things that we'll probably discuss is this whole issue of the post-war. Maybe by then, there will be kind of like half-baked some sort of like idea or plan what's going to be the arrangements on the ground in Gaza Strip post the war, but currently we are still in a preliminary phase.
And Saudi Arabia, you know, I keep using this terminology, and I'm not sure it is accurate, and yet perhaps the silver lining at this point in time is that the new axes of evil are clearly illustrated, and as a direct result, those who are, quote unquote, in the middle will not be able to stay there for much longer, as in Saudi Arabia will have to make a call. Cannot really stay on the fence for much longer. The summit in 10 days from now perhaps will give us the clearest indication.
Well, actually, we could see already indication. You know that the Saudis, since the first day of the war, the Saudis basically, to a large extent, express no
Stayed out,
interest.
yeah.
They are basically dealing with their own issues. They are hosting next year like big national, whatever, international game contest, and now they have been celebrating the fact that they are going to host the Mondial in 10 years from now, the World. So it's interesting. It's a Saudi statement. It's basically
The no statement.
The
is
no
a
statement is a statement. And by the way, there is another thing that I noticed. I looked at another regional player, Tunisia.
Also relatively quiet.
Tunisia, the president of Tunisia was one of the most proactive supporters of Hamas.
Right.
He is a bitter enemy of the state of Israel. He's a proactive supporter of Hamas. He's keeping a very low profile because, as part of what you said right now, the regional players are looking around and are starting to understand this is a shuffling of the cards in the Middle East. There is a new geostrategic alliance. They want to be on the right side of history.
And perhaps to add to that, Mr. Melamed, the American presence here in the region is not just sending a message to Israeli and American enemies, but rather to potential allies. This is what American friendship looks like. This is what a potential, without naming names, a potential defense alliance would look like.
Yes, Ellen, I'll take you back to Nasrallah's speech. He was threatening the United States and so on and so on.
Unimpressed by the...
Unimpressed. He's very impressed, and he's afraid. The United States of America in this war, and I've been saying it since day one, they did a very right move. When President Biden said to the Iranian, the Hezbollah, one word, he said, don't, and he backed it with military actions on the ground, they listened to that. This is what we call projection of power. You are very powerful when you don't have to use your power.
Right.
Your enemies are afraid of the possibility that you may use power. This is the first time, I think,
This
in the last...
This is the essence of deterrence, isn't it?
This is the essence of deterrence, and this is the first time, to the best of my knowledge, and I've been covering this region for many years, this is the first time that actually the United States of America doesn't even have to make speeches.
Right.
The message was crossing, the message was coming across. This is one of the major reasons, in the end of the day, that the Hezbollah and the Iranian decided to stay out of that war. If it wasn't for the United States of America, very clear message, backed up with military operation on the ground, we have been today in a very totally different scenario.
Yeah, the most powerful weapon is the one that you don't need to actually use. And yet, in this respect, taking into consideration all that we've just been discussing, Mr. Melamed, when we're talking about the hostage situation, it seems that Yahya Sinwar, who is handling business in the Gaza Strip, is somewhat drunk on power, not just willing to show flexibility, but the other way around, harshening his stance, elevating, ramping up the bars, claiming not or demanding diplomatic gestures or conditions, not just the release of security prisoners. Is the message not being conveyed to him properly? Is he is he losing connection to reality? How do you explain this lack of understanding in the Strip of what is the diplomatic framework outside? Qatar very much included.
It's about mindset. And the mindset of Hamas leaders in Gaza Strip, but not only there, this is a mindset that in the end of the day is very vicious. It's very vicious because, I'll give you an example. A couple of days ago, one of the most senior members of Hamas, member of the political bureau, Musa Abu Marzouk, he gave an interview to the Arab world in Arabic, and basically what he said was the following sentence. He said, we Hamas, we make the tunnels for Hamas, not for the people of Gaza. The world should take care of the people of Gaza. Hamas leaders simply, they don't care about the people of Gaza. As far as they are concerned about the endurance of Hamas as a player, as a relevant player. This is the mindset. This is the mindset that guides Yahya Sinwar. This is the mindset that guides Muhammad Deif. This is the mindset that guides Haniya and Mash'al and so on and so on. So in the end of the day, when we are trying to understand, as you said, what exactly guiding that behavior, this is what guiding the behavior. They are basically totally could not care less about the people of Gaza, about the suffering of the people of Gaza, and they are saying that openly.
So don't they understand that this is the end for Hamas's rule in the Gaza Strip?
They will never ever say something like that. They will, all the time, they are constantly conveying the message that Hamas is here, Hamas is to stay, Hamas will continue, and so on and so on. Nothing will change that mindset. Nothing will change that mindset. The most significant thing, and I was saying it in another context, but it's the same relevancy. Yes. When people ask me about what Nasrallah will say or not will say before the speech, I said, like, I don't care. It's important what he's going to do. The same applies for Hamas. We have to look at the major strategic objective. The major strategic objective of this war is to make sure that in the end of this war, Hamas is no longer relevant player. Because Hamas views itself up until now as a regional player.
Yes.
And the whole idea is actually to make Hamas an irrelevant player in all the levels, in all the dimensions.
And in that sense, Mr. Melamed, on the flip side of it, there is, as we speak, a very heated debate in Jerusalem, in the cabinet, on whether to provide or to transfer the funds, the tax funds, to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. According to reports, the ministerial level is opposing it. The military establishment, the security establishment is saying we need the security cooperation of the Palestinian Authority. It is of paramount importance, not just at this point in time, but yes, looking a few weeks ahead.
Here is what I want to say to the Israeli government. Maybe some people don't get it. This is a pivotal moment for many reasons. One of the major reasons it is a pivotal moment is that what happened right now in front of our eyes is that Israel is basically removing a major Palestinian player from the arena and basically leaves the arena to the major other Palestinian player, the Fatah organization and the Palestinian Authority. And let me tell you something. I'm talking with people from the West Bank.
Yes.
And they are basically saying to me, just finish the job. Just finish the job. Get rid of Hamas. This is the point. What we are doing here is something enormously significant because what we are doing here...
The Egyptians want it, the Palestinian wants it, the Jordan, everyone wants it.
Correct. And what we are doing here is enormously pivotal because first, something to remember, we have been dealing with this thing called Hamas for 40 years. 40 years. This entity, this organization has massacred thousands of Israelis and responsible for death and destruction for 40 years. Now we are in a point where basically the state of Israel could eliminate one of its most bitter enemies, but not less important, by pushing aside Hamas, by making it relevant, you leave the space for the Fatah organization that at least you can talk with, you can at least negotiate with.
And yet, Mr. Melamed, and you of all people know it better, best than all else, Hamas is ruling by force, and yet based on the principle of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that means winning over hearts and minds. And yes, Hamas was able, with or without Israeli encouragement, we will not get to that in recent years, to win over hearts and minds of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. So even if Hamas is, as a governing entity, not to speak about a military force, will be eliminated, the spirit of Hamas will not disappear so fast, especially with a very weak ideological gravitas of the Palestinian Authority.
That's correct, Eli, but we have to remember something significant. Nazism exists.
Right.
Nazi Germany was eliminated. The ideas, the ideology of Hamas, the ideology of ISIS, the ideology of Al-Qaeda and others will continue and exist. It exists. But we have to remember other thing. In the end of the day, what enables Hamas up until now to play a relevant role was his military spine.
Right.
Once you take this spine, this is a totally different story. And then there is another aspect that we have to bring in. Remember, the Arab world and Palestinians are looking at what's going on in Gaza Strip. This is something that is echoing across the Middle East already by now. The lessons have to be internalized and understood in the Arab world, and I think that they are starting to percolate into the minds and hearts of people in the Arab world. In the end of the days, we are looking at something that once this thing is over and hopefully Hamas is no longer a relevant player, we are looking at a totally different environment.
Taiwan, Ukraine, not just the Middle East, watching the entire world. Avi Melamed, founder of Inside the Middle East Institute. Pleasure to be speaking to you, sir. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Thank you very much for watching.